Welcome back. We are in the second part of our discussion on the new surge policy declared by the Obama administration in Afghanistan. In the first part, we discussed the implications for the military and political future in Afghanistan itself. And in this part, we will be discussing the implications for Pakistan, India, the wider South Asian region, and for the wider region as a whole. To discuss these, we have with us Professor Aijaz Ahmad, well-known political commentator. So Aijaz, let me first ask you about the strategy as it is viewed from Pakistan. Viewed from Pakistan, Pakistan has always been arguing, I would say, from two sides of the issue. On the one hand, they've called upon the US to stay the course, to stay for a long time, not do what they did when the Soviets were in Afghanistan, is to cut and run after the thing was over. So they are, in a sense, asking for the US to prolong their stay. On the other hand, they seem to be saying, you are a major problem in the region, the sooner you get out, the better. How has Pakistan responded to this surge strategy, and how do you see that?
Look, the longer the Americans stay in Pakistan, the more the Pakistani elite, ruling class, the military, and so on, get enormous amounts of money, both for military hardware and so-called economic development and so on and so forth. So that's a very favorable sort of thing for them to accumulate money. However, I think the Pakistanis are saying at a certain level what everyone else, except perhaps the Indian government, is saying, that the real problem is the American presence in the area. Right. The reason why the Pakistani Taliban have become so powerful with such widespread support is that 80% of the American supplies to Afghanistan are still going through Pakistan. And the Pakistani people don't want that sort of thing, and the Pashtuns particularly are up in arms against that. The sooner that process ends, the better it is. Secondly, Pakistanis are positioning themselves as it appears India is positioning itself to have the favorable position in Afghanistan after the Americans leave. Right. Everyone knows that Americans are going to leave sooner or later. They're not going to be there forever. They don't have the capacity for it, and so on. So, you know, I mean, there's a widespread opinion in West Asia that the problem is the American presence. The problem is Israeli actions and ambitions. Unless you address that, you cannot get rid of this Islamic terrorism.
There's been much commentary since the announcement by President Obama, and some of it even before, in anticipation of it, that if an exit date has been announced, 2011 is not far off, the Taliban may seek to ride it out till that time. Pakistan too could ride it out and wait for the Taliban resurgence to take place once the American exit starts, and restore what the Pakistani military establishment in particular has always wanted, which is their own friends in power in Kabul, giving them strategic depth and so on. So would they not also be looking at it from that angle?
Our information is, and it's a well-known fact, that Pakistanis are now negotiating already with every faction that are collectively called the Taliban by the Americans, with Hikmatyar, with Haqqani's group, with the whole lot, already positioning themselves for the time when the Americans start withdrawing. And that Pakistanis will continue to do, because Pakistanis understand something that Americans should understand, but they don't want to face up to the fact, which is that the so-called Taliban, which is really a very big coalition of forces, is a guerrilla army. And no guerrilla army has ever been defeated. Right. Ever. Once it takes root, either it's nipped in the bud in the first year or two or three, or it is never defeated. So at the end of the day, there's going to be power sharing. Yeah. and Americans are going to have to agree for that sort of thing. So everyone is actually angling for what that power sharing formula will be and when.
So how does that play out in the wider region? The kind of influence that Pakistan has with these many factions of the Taliban. Neither Iran has that kind of influence on the one side, nor do the Central Asian republics, nor of course does India. So how does this play out? Is there going to be a vacuum in Afghanistan when the Americans leave?
I'm not at all sure, but in fact Iran does have influence in a region that is closer to, in Herat and those areas. India does have influence, not as much as Pakistan might have with certain forces, but India was together with Russia,
with the Northern Alliance.
With the Northern Alliance and so on. India is pouring in money now, and India is building up great influence with the present establishment in Afghanistan, which I think will also be a part of that power sharing. Sure. So it is that balance that you're really talking about. And yet at one level, something that worries me very much is that Afghanistan is shaping up as a sort of a proxy war between India and Pakistan. That's right. Increasingly so. And my fear is that we are encouraging the Americans both for surge, for escalation, and for staying the course in the long term, right. So that we can obtain, with the help of the Americans, a more favorable position.
Or at least a denial of a more favorable position for Pakistan. Yes, I think that's the way the Indian military establishment
which comes right. Essentially to the same thing. Under the argument which seems to have convinced a lot of people in New Delhi is that we need the Americans to fight these terrorists.
Right.
In fact, it's quite the opposite. Americans can do nothing about Lashkar-e-Taiba. They can do nothing with the militants inside Pakistan. In fact, they get strengthened because of the inflamed sentiments because of the American presence in the area. I think that is a misperception in Delhi, and I think we need more sober assessment here.
So is the way out then a greater degree of rapprochement, of developing common interests with Pakistan for India? Would that not be the way out of this imbroglio, and why is India not able to move in that direction?
We are not able to move in that direction partly because of the kind of strategic alliance we are seeking with the United States.
Right.
The other thing, of course, is that these very militants are going to be used against India once Pakistan gets stabilized in Afghanistan. So the Indians logically would feel very relieved the longer Pakistan is engaged with all of that. I do believe that the recent letter that Obama wrote to Zardari asking him for a greater cooperation against all five, and he names all five, Afghan Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, the Haqqani Network, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Al-Qaeda. That was done, I think, in cooperation with India, and very rightly so. And that is a strategic interest of India, and that's a legitimate interest of India. The perception that longer American presence and a greater military commitment in Afghanistan will somehow obtain that result, that is where I believe there is a misperception. Our refusal to talk to Pakistan after those dreadful attacks in
Mumbai,
in Bombay, has, beyond a certain point, it's counterproductive.
And once India also gets involved in this game of trying to suck in the Americans into the subcontinent's problems, whether you say so or not, in playing an important intermediary role in the South Asian region, their embroilment is ensured.
And you see, in Afghanistan, in my view, what you need to have, at the end of the day, aside from a power-sharing formula and extensive disarmament of all the fighting forces in Afghanistan, but you also have to have a disengagement not only of the Americans but also to a great degree Pakistan and India as well.
Absolutely.
You know, otherwise, you know, an infinite engagement, escalation of this engagement between the two
will keep the pot boiling.
Will keep the pot boiling and will make it even more difficult for India and Pakistan to resolve other problems. Right. You know, so Afghanistan should be a place from where we work out what our respective minimal interests are and how we can live with each other with those minimal interests.
Thank you, Professor Aijaz, for a very wide-ranging discussion.